This land belongs to the HOA now. You either comply, or we take it from you, she said, standing on my dirt driveway like she already owned every acre behind me. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. My name is Caleb Turner, and for the past 12 years, I've lived on a piece of land that doesn't show up on most people's maps, an off-grid ranch tucked deep into the rolling high plains of Wyoming. No power lines, no city water, no neighbors close enough to hear your business. Just wind through the pines, the slow creak of old wood settling at sunrise, and the kind of silence you only get when a place has been in your family longer than the county records office can remember. My grandfather bought this land in 1968 with cash and a handshake, back when boundaries were marked with iron stakes and trust meant something. I kept it that way. Solar panels on the South Ridge, a well that tastes like cold stone, and a long gravel road that winds through 2 gates before it even reaches my house. Beautiful, steady, mine. That peace lasted right up until Nancy Sterling showed up. I heard her before I saw her. The crunch of expensive tires on my gravel, sharp and out of place, followed by the unmistakable click of heels stepping on a dirt that had never asked for permission. She came dressed like she was attending a board meeting in downtown Denver. Pressed blazer, oversized sunglasses, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of authority. "You Caleb Turner?" she asked, not introducing herself, not even pretending this was a conversation. I nodded once, leaning against the tailgate of my truck, letting her talk. People like her always do. Nancy Sterling, HOA president for Silver Ridge Estates. She gestured vaguely toward the hills beyond my north fence line, where just 6 months ago, nothing but sagebrush stood. Now, there were rooftops, dozens of them, identical, beige, and packed tight like someone dropped a suburban template into open land. "We've had several reports about your property," she continued, flipping through papers like she was building a case. "Unregistered structures, non-compliant utilities, unauthorized fencing. Frankly, it's a liability issue." I let that hang in the air for a second, then asked the only question that mattered. "What HOA?" Her lips tightened just slightly. "Silver Ridge Estates governs this entire development area. That includes your parcel." Now, I've spent enough years dealing with contracts, land surveys, and the occasional overreaching official to know when someone's bluffing and when they genuinely believe their own authority. Nancy was the second kind, and that's always more dangerous. "My land predates whatever you're running up there," I said calmly, "by about 50 years. She smiled then, not friendly, not polite, but practiced. "That's not how jurisdiction works anymore, Mr. Turner. Expansion plans were approved at the county level. Your property falls within our designated boundary." The wind picked up just then, carrying that dry, dusty smell across the ridge, and I remember thinking how strange it was that someone could stand on land like this. Land with history, weight, memory, and treat it like a checkbox on a development map. "You don't get to redraw lines just because you built houses nearby," I said. Nancy didn't argue. She just stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was doing me a favor. "You have 2 options," she said. "You can bring this property into compliance with HOA standards, or we begin enforcement." Enforcement. The way she said it, clean, rehearsed, almost casual, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about grass height or fencing. This was about control. And Nancy Sterling had already decided my land belonged to her little empire, whether I agreed or not. I watched her walk back to her SUV, heels grinding into gravel like she was stamping her authority into the ground itself. Engine started, door slammed, and just like that, she was gone. But the dust she kicked up lingered. And standing there, alone again in the quiet, I realized something simple, something important. She wasn't asking. She was preparing to take. And that meant whatever came next wasn't going to stay polite for long. Nancy did not come back alone. 3 days later, just after sunrise, I spotted 2 white pickups climbing the ridge road that bordered my western fence line, slow, deliberate, like men checking acreage they thought was already spoken for. I killed the generator behind my workshop and stepped out into the morning chill with a mug of black coffee in my hand, watching them stop near the old survey, post my father had reinforced with concrete back in the 80s. One man hopped out with a bright orange vest and a tripod. The other carried roll plans under his arm. Neither one came to my gate. Neither one asked permission. They just started setting up equipment on the far side of my fence and pointing toward my barn, my well house, my corrals, my home. That was the moment I understood Nancy Sterling wasn't just trying to bully me into compliance. She was measuring how to absorb me. By noon, I drove into town and stopped at the county records office, a squat brick building with fluorescent lights, squeaky tile, and that familiar smell of dust, printer toner, and old paper that only government buildings seem perfect. I'd spent enough years helping neighboring ranchers sort access disputes and grazing leases to know one thing for certain. When somebody starts acting confident about your land, they've usually built that confidence on a document, real or fake. Martha Coyle was behind the counter that day, same as always, gray braid down her back, reading glasses low on her nose, expression sharp enough to cut rope. She knew my family, knew my grandfather, knew better than to waste my time. "Morning, Caleb," she said. "You look like a man who found trouble before breakfast." "Might have found developers," I told her. "That's usually worse." She snorted once, then helped me pull the recent filings tied to Silver Ridge Estates. For the first 20 minutes, it looked like the usual county mess: plat maps, utility easements, drainage reviews, road maintenance agreements. Then I saw it. A boundary exhibit attached to a revised expansion packet, and my parcel was outlined and cited in red. Not adjacent, not neighboring. Inside. I stared at that page long enough to feel heat rising in my neck. "That survey's wrong," I said. Martha leaned over, squinted, then straightened slowly. "More than wrong," she muttered. "That's a problem." The legal description listed my ranch as if it had been rolled into a common development corridor. Same parcel number, but altered directional calls. The eastern marker was moved nearly 200 feet. My private access road was labeled as a shared emergency route. And the signature block at the bottom carried the stamp of a survey consultant I'd never hired, never met, and sure as hell never authorized to touch my property. I remembered something my grandfather used to say while running his thumb over an old deed. "A thief in a suit still steals. He just bills by the hour." Martha printed copies, then lowered her voice. "This packet got approved fast. Too fast. Came through with county planning endorsements and a clean support memo." "From who?" I asked. She tapped the page with one finger. "Board recommendation attached by the Silver Ridge HOA." There was the cold center of it. Nancy hadn't simply been making threats from the hood of an SUV. She had paper in motion, contractors lined up, and somebody in county planning either asleep at the wheel or looking the other way. I took every copy Martha could legally give me and drove straight back to the ranch. That evening, instead of dinner, I spread documents across my kitchen table beneath the yellow glow of an old lamp my mother used to keep by the window. Original deed, tax records, water rights, access maps, fence maintenance receipts going back years. And there, buried inside the revised packet, was the piece that turned irritation into certainty. An affidavit claiming the subject owner had ceased active use of portions of the land and that the area in question had been informally opened for community planning access. Informally opened. I actually laughed when I read it, but there wasn't anything funny about the sound that came out of me. That road was behind 2 locked gates. The back pasture hadn't seen a stranger in months. An active use? My cattle were on the ground. My well was running. My taxes were paid. My name was on every inch of that place. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had manufactured a narrative. Over the next week, I changed my routine without making it obvious. I drove the perimeter every evening just before dark. I checked locks, hinges, trail cams, and corner markers. Twice, I found boot prints where no one had business walking. Once, I found fresh flagging tape tied to a cedar branch 20 yards inside my northern boundary. Bright pink, cheap, careless, arrogant. Nancy came back on the 7th day, and this time she didn't park at the house. She stood outside my closed gate with her phone raised, taking pictures through the bars like she was documenting a crime scene. I walked down there slowly, hands open, posture easy, She smiled when she saw me, but there was no warmth in it. Still resisting progress? She asked, still standing on land that isn't yours? I said. Her jaw tightened for half a second. Just half. Then she recovered. You really should stop making this difficult, Caleb. There are people above your pay grade involved now. That line told me more than she meant it to. People above my pay grade. County offices. Survey consultants. Planning endorsements. Maybe more. I looked at her over the top rail and kept my voice flat. You're moving awful fast for somebody who thinks she's right. Nancy tilted her head. Fast is what happens when paperwork is already in place. Then she got back in her SUV and drove off, leaving me with the dust, the silence, and a stack of proof that this wasn't ordinary HOA arrogance anymore. This was organized land fraud wrapped in administrative language. And from that moment on, I stopped thinking like a homeowner being harassed. I started thinking like a man building a case. The next time Nancy Sterling came onto my property, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, didn't quote deeds, didn't point at survey stakes or boundary lines. Nothing. Instead, I did something that caught her completely off guard. I opened the gate. She pulled up just before noon. Same white SUV, same sharp angles and polished arrogance. But this time I was already standing there waiting, one hand resting casually on the latch like I'd been expecting her. For a split second, I saw hesitation flicker across her face. Just a crack, then it vanished. Well, she said, stepping out, smoothing her blazer. I'm glad you've decided to be reasonable. I gave her a slow nod. Been thinking about what you said, I replied. About compliance, about making things easier. That word, easier, landed exactly the way I wanted it to. Nancy relaxed, just slightly. Shoulders dropped. Chin lifted. She stepped forward like she was walking into a victory already signed and sealed. That's the smart move, Caleb, she said, her tone shifting from sharp to almost approving. People who fight this kind of transition usually end up regretting it. I stepped aside and gestured toward the ranch. You wanted access, I said. Go ahead. Take a look. That's when everything changed. Because in her mind, the fight was over. Nancy didn't question it, didn't slow down, didn't ask why a man who had stood firm for weeks suddenly folded overnight. She just walked right past me, heels crunching over gravel, eyes scanning everything like she was already taking inventory. I'll need full documentation of structures, she called over her shoulder. Water systems, fencing, livestock counts. We'll standardize everything under HOA guidelines. I nodded again, quiet, agreeable, exactly what she expected. What she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the small black dome mounted under the corner of my barn roof, or the second one tucked into the eave above the well house, or the trail cams positioned along the fence line she'd already crossed without permission. Every step she took past that gate was being recorded. Every word, every instruction, every assumption of control. This access road, she continued, pointing with her pen, will need to be reclassified. Emergency services require open entry, so we'll remove those secondary barriers. I kept my voice even, if that's what needs to happen. She turned back toward me then, studying my face like she was trying to confirm something. Maybe she expected anger, resistance, pride. Instead, she found none of it, and that's what convinced her. You could see it happen the exact moment she decided I was beaten. Good, she said, smiling wider now. This will go a lot smoother than I thought. Over the next 20 minutes, she walked deeper into my land than anyone outside my family had in years. Past the first pasture, past the equipment shed, past the ridge where my solar array sat angled toward the sun. She made notes, took photos, issued directions into her phone like she was already coordinating changes. And the further she went, the more comfortable she became, like a trespasser who had convinced herself she'd been invited. I followed a few steps behind, hands in my pockets, listening, measuring, letting her build the case against herself piece by piece. We'll have a crew out here by the end of the week, she said at one point. Start clearing that back section for shared utility access. Shared utility access. Words that didn't belong anywhere near my property, but she used them like they were already law. I stopped walking right there and let her move ahead without me. Let her cross one more fence line. Let her step fully into the restricted pasture beyond the posted markers. Let her commit, completely and unmistakably, to the act she thought she had the authority to perform. Then I reached in my pocket, pulled out my phone, and checked the time. Everything was lining up exactly the way it needed to. Nancy Sterling thought she had just secured control over my land. Thought she had broken me down, turned resistance into cooperation. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't even imagine, was that every second she spent inside that fence, every order she gave, every boundary she crossed, wasn't proof of her power. It was evidence. And by the time she realized that, it was already going to be too late. Nancy didn't stop at walking my land like she owned it. She escalated. The next morning, just after 8 a.m., I heard engines again, heavier this time. Not just SUVs. We're trucks. I stepped out onto the porch and watched a convoy roll up my access road. 2 pickups, a flatbed with equipment, and a compact excavator chained down like it had somewhere very specific to be. They didn't slow down at the first gate. They didn't even hesitate, because it was already open. I had left it that way on purpose. Nancy stepped out of the lead vehicle, sunglasses on, phone in hand, barking instructions before her boots even hit the dirt. "This is the section," she said, pointing past my north fence line. "We're establishing the shared access corridor today. Get the markers down and start clearing." Not one person on that crew looked at me. Not one asked permission. They moved like they had a contract, like this was already approved, already owned. And Nancy? She stood there like a project manager overseeing her investment, completely blind to the line she was about to cross. I walked down slowly. Same calm pace, same neutral expression. "You're moving fast," I said. She didn't even turn fully toward me. "We don't have the luxury of delays," she replied. "There are infrastructure deadlines tied to this expansion." Infrastructure. Deadlines. Words designed to sound official, to mask something far uglier underneath. I leaned against the fence post and watched as one of her crew members pulled out bolt cutters, big, industrial jaws that glinted in the morning light, and walked straight toward my locked secondary gate. That gate wasn't decorative. It marked the boundary between general access land and restricted pasture, private, posted, and documented. "Go ahead," Nancy said casually, not even lowering her voice. "That barrier isn't compliant anyway." The metallic snap echoed louder than anything else that morning. Steel. Chain, cut clean in one motion. The lock dropped into the dirt with a dull thud. And just like that, they were inside. That was it. That was the moment. The exact action she would never be able to undo. I didn't move. Didn't react. Just watched. Because every camera I'd placed, every angle, every audio pickup was capturing it all. The unauthorized entry. The destruction of private property. The assumption of control. Nancy stepped through the open gate like she just unlocked her own front door, heels pressing into soil my grandfather once walked barefoot. "Start clearing from that ridge," she instructed. "We need at least a 20-foot corridor for utility vehicles." One of the workers hesitated, just barely. "Ma'am, this looks like active grazing land." Nancy didn't even blink. "It's being reclassified," she said sharply. "We have county support. Proceed." That sentence right there, that confidence, that absolute certainty, she was untouchable. That's what made this more than just trespassing. That's what made it fraud. Because no legitimate approval moves this fast, no legal boundary change bypasses the owner standing right there, and no honest project requires cutting locks instead of opening doors. I took a slow breath, then pulled my phone out, not to record that was already handled, but to send a single message. For words. It's happening right now. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept watching. The excavator rolled forward, its engine rumbling low, metal tracks grinding over earth that had never known anything but cattle and wind. One of the crew started marking trees with spray paint. Another began unloading tools to clear brush. And Nancy, she stood there with her arms crossed, scanning the land like she was calculating profit margins in real time. That's when she said something that confirmed everything I needed. "Once this corridor is open," she told one of the supervisors, "we can finally push phase 3 through." The valuation jumps immediately. Valuation. There it was. Not safety, not compliance. Money. This whole operation, every forged boundary, every fabricated claim, was about inflating property values for the development she controlled. My land wasn't an obstacle, it was leverage, and she needed it converted fast before anyone had time to question how she got it. I let the silence stretch for a few more minutes, let the machines start their work, let the damage begin just enough to seal the case beyond argument. Then I turned slightly, looking back toward the long road leading into the ranch. And right on time, I heard it. Tires. Different this time. Heavier. Slower. Controlled. Nancy didn't notice at first. She was too busy issuing orders, too busy playing owner on land that wasn't hers. But I saw them, and I knew, the moment she'd been so confident about, the one where she thought she had already won, was about to flip in a way she could never recover from. The first sheriff's vehicle came into view just as the excavator's bucket tore into the edge of my pasture, metal teeth ripping through grass that had taken decades to settle into place. It wasn't fast, wasn't dramatic, just a steady roll down the gravel road, followed by a second unit behind it. County markings clear as day. No sirens, no ruse, just presence. I didn't move, didn't announce it. I let the moment breathe, let Nancy continue exactly as she was, mid-command, mid-trespass, mid-crime. Push that line further east, she was saying, gesturing with her pen. We need a clean corridor or the utility bids won't hold. That word, bids, hung in the air longer than she realized, because by now, I already knew what she was hiding. Over the past few nights, while she thought I was backing down, I've been digging quietly, methodically, into everything tied to Silver Ridge Estates. Not just land records, but financial filings, contractor registrations, development loans. And what I found, it wasn't just aggressive expansion. It was a full-blown financial shell game. Multiple LLCs tied to the HOA board, layered ownership structures routing payments through consulting services, inflated infrastructure contracts approved internally with no competitive bidding. Millions of dollars moving on paper for projects that either didn't exist or were deliberately overvalued. And right at the center of it all, Nancy Sterling's signature. Not just as HOA president, but as an authorized agent on at least 3 of those shell entities. That's not mismanagement. That's federal wire fraud. That's money laundering. That's prison time. And my land? It wasn't just land to her. It was the missing piece, the leverage needed to justify phase 3 of the development, trigger a new round of investor funding, and bury the paper trail under legitimate expansion costs. Which is why she needed control fast. Why she couldn't afford delays. Why she was standing here now, cutting locks, and issuing orders like time itself was closing. In. The sheriff's vehicles rolled to a stop just beyond the first gate. Doors opened. Deputies stepped out, calm, deliberate, hands resting near their belts, but not drawing attention. Nancy still hadn't turned around. She was too focused on her operation, too locked into the illusion of authority she'd built around herself. I took a slow step forward, just enough to shift her line of sight. You might want to pause that, I said evenly. She glanced at me, annoyed more than anything. We're on a schedule, Caleb. If you decided to cooperate, then stay out of the way. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just tilted my head slightly toward the road behind her. That's when she saw them. The shift in her posture was subtle, but unmistakable. Shoulders stiffened, chin lifted a fraction higher, like she was preparing to explain her way out of something she didn't fully understand yet. One of the deputies approached, boots steady on gravel. Morning, he said, voice neutral. We received a report about unauthorized entry and property damage. Nancy recovered quickly, too quickly. This is a controlled development site, she replied, stepping forward with that same practice confidence. We have county-approved expansion rights. There's no issue here. The deputy didn't respond immediately. He just looked past her, at the broken chain, the equipment inside the restricted pasture, the active clearing already underway. Then he glanced at me. I gave a small nod. No words, just confirmation. Nancy kept talking, filling the silence like she always did. If there's confusion, I can provide documentation, she said, already reaching for her phone. Our legal team, ma'am, The deputy cut in, calm but firm. "We'll need you to step back from the work area for now." That's when the first crack appeared. Real irritation this time. Not just annoyance, pressure. "I'm not stepping back from my own project," she snapped. "This land is under HOA jurisdiction." I watched her carefully in that moment because everything she said now mattered. Every claim, every assertion of authority. Because behind her words was something bigger, something she didn't realize was already unraveling. Those financial records I'd uncovered, I hadn't kept them to myself. 2 nights ago, I'd forwarded everything, every transaction, every shell company, every inflated contract, to a contact I trusted at the state level. Someone who understood exactly what it meant when development money started moving like that. And this morning, this wasn't just about trespassing anymore. This was about timing. Nancy Sterling thought she was expanding her empire, thought she was forcing compliance through intimidation and paperwork. But standing there, arguing with a county deputy while her crew sat inside land they had no legal right to touch, she was doing something far more dangerous. She was cementing the evidence. And somewhere beyond that ridge, beyond the quiet and the dust, wheels were already in motion that she couldn't see and couldn't stop. The air shifted in a way you only notice when something irreversible is about to happen. The deputies had spread out just enough to control the space. One near the broken gate, another by the equipment, a third keeping a quiet eye on the crew that had suddenly gone very still. Engines idled, metal ticked as it cooled. And for the first time since Nancy arrived, the ranch felt like it was holding its breath. But Nancy Sterling? She wasn't backing down. If anything, the presence of law enforcement seemed to harden her posture. She straightened her blazer, adjusted her sunglasses, and stepped forward like she was about to address a room she owned. "This is unnecessary," she said sharply, her voice carrying just enough authority to sound rehearsed. "We are operating under approved development authority. If there's confusion, that's on your end, not mine." One of the deputies glanced at the excavator, then back at her. "Ma'am, we'll need all work to stop until this is sorted out." Nancy let out a short, dismissive laugh, the kind that doesn't come from humor, but from someone who believes the rules don't apply to them. "Stop," she repeated. "Do you have any idea what delays cost on a project like this?" She turned halfway, gesturing toward the half-cleared stretch of land like it was already hers. "We're not shutting this down because of a misunderstanding." I stepped forward then, not aggressively, not confrontational, just enough to stand beside the deputy, close enough that Nancy couldn't ignore me anymore. My voice stayed level, steady, the same tone I'd used since the beginning. "Nancy," I said, "you might want to think very carefully about what happens next." She turned to face me fully now, lips curling into something between a smile and a sneer. "Oh, I've thought about it," she said. "Extensively." I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch just long enough to matter. "Are you absolutely sure you want to keep going?" I asked quietly, because once you do, there's no walking this back. That was it, the last chance. Clear, direct, no threats, no raised voices, just truth laid out plain. And for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, I saw it. Doubt, a flicker behind her eyes. But didn't last. It never does with people like her. Nancy exhaled slowly, then shook her head like she was disappointed in me. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice dropping into that condescending tone she'd perfected. "This isn't your land anymore. Not in any way that matters." She took a step closer, lowering her voice like she was letting me in on a secret. "You're just slow to accept it." Then she straightened and turned away from me, dismissing me completely. "Go ahead," she called out to the crew. "Continue clearing. We're not stopping for this." That was the moment, the point of no return. One of the workers hesitated, looking between Nancy and the deputies like he knew exactly how bad this could get. "Ma'am, maybe we should," I said. "Continue." Nancy snapped, sharp enough to cut through the air. "I'll handle any legal fallout." Legal fallout. She said it like it was a minor inconvenience, like paperwork, like something her team could smooth over with a few signatures and a phone call. She had no idea what kind of line she just crossed. The excavator roared back to life, engine grinding louder this time as it swung its arm toward the fence line. Another section of my land, my family's land, was about to be torn open under her direct order in front of sworn officers on camera with a documented chain of fraudulent authority backing it. I didn't move, didn't stop it, because I didn't need to anymore. Nancy Sterling had just made her decision, loud, clear, and irreversible. And as the bucket dropped toward the earth, as metal met soil again, I knew something she didn't. This wasn't her project anymore. This wasn't her timeline. And whatever she thought she was building out here wasn't going to survive what came next. The excavator's bucket had just bitten into the earth again when the second deputy stepped forward, this time with purpose. "Kill the engine," he called out, voice no longer neutral, no longer a request. The operator froze, glanced at Nancy, then back at the deputy. For the first time all morning, hesitation spread through the crew like a ripple. Nancy turned sharply, irritation flashing across her face. "Do not stop," she snapped. "You are authorized to be here." The deputy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Engine off. Now." There was something different in the tone this time. Final, immovable. The operator reached down and cut the machine. Silence dropped over the ranch, so fast it felt heavy. Nancy took a step forward, her heels striking the dirt harder now, controlled composure cracking at the edges. "You're overstepping," she said, voice tight. "I've already explained. This is a sanctioned development zone." The deputy reached into his vest, pulled out a folded document, and held it up. Not for show, not for drama, just fact. "Nancy Sterling?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked to the paper, then back to him. "Yes," she said, chin lifting again, trying to reclaim ground she'd already lost. "What is this?" He didn't hand it to her. He read from it. "We have a county-issued warrant for investigation into fraudulent land filings, unlawful property encroachment, and financial misconduct tied to Silver Ridge Estates and its governing body." The words landed slow, deliberate, each one heavier than the last. Nancy blinked once, then again. The confidence didn't disappear all at once. It fractured. That's not possible," she said, a small laugh slipping out, brittle and forced. "There must be some mistake. Our filings were approved based on falsified documentation," the deputy interrupted, "including altered boundary descriptions and unauthorized affidavits." Her mouth opened, then closed. The sunglasses came off now, revealing something she hadn't shown once since stepping onto my land. Not anger, not control, uncertainty. Another deputy stepped in beside him, holding a tablet. "We also have documentation of financial transfers tied to multiple shell entities connected to the HOA," he added. "Funds routed through inflated infrastructure contracts to accounts under your authorization." That was it. That was the moment the floor dropped out from under her. Because trespassing? She could argue. Boundary disputes? She could spin. But financial records? Paper trails? Federal-level fraud tied directly to her name? There's no talking your way out of that. "I don't know what you think you've found," she said, but her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. It wavered, just slightly but enough. "This is standard development structuring, wire transfers totaling over $3.2 million, the deputy said, glancing at the tablet. "Processed through 3 LLCs you're listed on as an authorized signatory." Silence. Not the quiet of the ranch, but the kind that fills a space when reality hits all at once. Nancy looked around then, really looked for the first time, at the deputies, at the idle equipment, at the broken gate behind her, and then at me. I hadn't moved, still standing where I'd been, hands relaxed at my sides, watching it all unfold exactly the way it was supposed to. That's when it clicked for her. You could see it, the realization crawling across her face, replacing arrogance with something colder, sharper. "Fear. She said, barely above a whisper. "You set this up." I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just met her eyes and said, "You walked right into it." Her shoulders dropped a fraction, like the weight of everything she'd built was suddenly pressing down all at once. "This is ridiculous," she tried again, but the fight was gone from it now. You can't just, ma'am, the first deputy said, stepping closer. At this point, you need to stop speaking. The crew had already backed away, tools lowered, eyes fixed anywhere but her. No one wanted to be part of what this had become. Nancy stood there in the middle of it all. The land she thought she owned, the projects she thought she controlled, the narrative she thought she'd written, now collapsing piece by piece under the weight of actual law. And the irony? It was complete. She had come onto my ranch to take control, to assert dominance, to prove she held the authority. Instead, she had just demonstrated, on record, on camera, in front of witnesses, every single violation needed to dismantle everything she'd built. The deputy folded the warrant back into his vest, his voice steady. You're going to need to come with us. And for the first time since Nancy Sterling set foot on my land, she didn't have a single word left to say. They didn't make a scene about it. That's what made it so final. One deputy stepped in behind Nancy, calm, controlled. No raised voices, no drama, and gently but firmly guided her hands behind her back. The metallic click of handcuffs closing around her wrists cut through the silence, sharper than anything that had happened all morning. Nancy flinched at the sound, not because it hurt, but because it was real, irreversible. You can't do this, she said, the words coming out fast now, uneven, like she was trying to catch up to something already gone. This is a misunderstanding. My attorneys you'll have the opportunity to speak with counsel, the deputy replied evenly. No emotion, no negotiation, just process. The same system she thought she could manipulate, now closing around her step by step. They turned her gently, not roughly, but with a certainty that left no room for resistance. And for the first time since she arrived on my land, Nancy Sterling looked small, not physically but in presence. The confidence, the authority, the performance, it was all gone. What stood there now was just a defendant caught in the middle of her own actions. The crew had already backed off completely. Tools dropped, equipment silent. One of the workers quietly stepped away toward his truck, not wanting to be anywhere near what this had become. Another pulled out his phone, not to record, but to call someone, probably a supervisor, maybe a lawyer. It didn't matter. Whatever contracts they thought they were fulfilling had just collapsed into evidence. As the deputies escorted Nancy toward the vehicle, she kept talking, quieter now, more frantic than commanding. You don't understand the scale of this, she said, voice tight. There are investors involved, contracts. This development is backed by exactly, one of the deputies said, opening the rear door. That's why this isn't staying at the county level. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Because Nancy knew what it meant. County doesn't handle multi-million-dollar wire fraud. County doesn't investigate layered LLC structures and interstate financial movement. That's federal territory. And the moment she realized that whatever fight she thought she still had left drained right out of her, they guided her into the back seat. Door closed. No Islam. Just a quiet final click. The kind that signals a transition you don't come back from. I stood there, watching as the second deputy walked back toward me, pulling a small notepad from his vest. We'll need a formal statement from you, he said, and copies of any documentation you've gathered. I nodded once, already prepared. He gave a short, approving glance, nothing more, and moved on to coordinate with the others. Efficient, controlled, like this was just another case, even though I knew it wasn't. Because what Nancy had built wasn't small. It wasn't just one bad decision or one overstep. It was systemic, intentional, a financial structure designed to siphon money, inflate valuations, and hide it all behind the appearance of legitimate development. And now, that entire structure was exposed. Over the next 48 hours, the fallout hit like a controlled demolition. Silver Ridge Estates accounts were frozen pending investigation. Every operating fund, every escrow account, every development pool. Construction halted across all phases, not just on my land. Notices went out to contractors, lenders, and investors. Work orders canceled. Payments suspended. The kind of shutdown that doesn't just pause a project, it collapses it. By the end of the week, federal agents had stepped in quietly, methodically, executing warrants on offices tied to the HOA and its associated entities. Financial records seized. Servers pulled. communication logs archived. The paper trail Nancy thought she had buried under layers of corporate structure. It unraveled faster than she could have imagined. News didn't take long to catch up. Local coverage first, development fraud investigation expands, then regional outlets picked it up once the numbers started surfacing. Millions mis à l'enquête. Dozens of investors affected. Potential charges ranging from wire fraud to conspiracy and money laundering. Her name was everywhere now, but not as a president, not as a leader, as a defendant. And the HOA? It didn't survive the week. Board members resigned, some immediately, some after receiving their own legal notices. Legal counsel distanced themselves fast. Homeowners, people who had trusted that organization, were left scrambling, demanding answers, filing complaints. The structure Nancy had used to control everyone around her dissolved the moment real law stepped in. A month later, I drove into town again, same courthouse, same building, and saw her name printed on a docket sheet behind the clerk's counter. Federal charges filed. Multiple counts. No bail decision yet. I didn't stay long. Didn't need to, because standing back on my ranch that evening, watching the sun drop behind the ridge, the wind moving through the same trees my grandfather planted decades ago, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. The land hadn't changed. The fences still stood. The gates, repaired now, held firm. The only thing that was gone was the illusion that someone like Nancy Sterling could take it. Spring came slow that year, but when it did, it settled over the ranch like it had been waiting for everything to quiet. Down first, the wind still moved the same way through the trees, still carried that dry, clean scent across the ridgeline. But there was a difference now, something steadier beneath it. The kind of calm that isn't just natural, it's earned. The damaged stretch of pasture where the excavator had torn through was the first thing I fixed. Not quickly, not rushed, but right. I pulled the broken soil back into place, reseeded it by hand, and ran temporary fencing to give it time to breathe again. There's a rhythm to land restoration, one you don't rush if you actually care about the outcome. And I did, because this place wasn't just property. It was continuity, memory, responsibility. A few weeks after everything settled, something unexpected started happening. People from Silver Ridge began showing up, not in SUVs with clipboards, not with demands, but quietly. Hesitant. Homeowners, families, folks who had bought into something they didn't fully understand until it was too late. One afternoon, a couple stood at the edge of my main gate, not crossing it, just waiting. I walked down to meet them. "We didn't know," the man said, voice low, almost apologetic, about any of it. The land, the way it was handled. I nodded once. Most people didn't. They didn't ask for anything. Didn't argue. Just wanted to understand where the lines actually were, what was real and what had been manufactured. And that's when I made a decision. Not for them, but for the land itself. I worked with the county, not the same office that had rubber-stamped Nancy's paperwork, but the investigators who came in after, to formally reestablish and record every boundary on my property with updated surveys, verified markers, and clear legal documentation that couldn't be twisted or reinterpreted down the line. Clean, precise, final. But I didn't stop there. Along the northern ridge, the section Nancy had tried so hard to turn into a shared corridor, I did something different. Instead of reinforcing it as a barrier, I created a designated access easement. Narrow, clearly defined, legally protected, not for development, not for expansion, but for emergency services only. Fire crews, medical response, real necessity, not profit. And every homeowner in that development received a copy of those terms. Clear language, no loopholes, no ambiguity. You could see the shift after that. The tension that had been building between the ranch and the subdivision, it eased. Not overnight, but steadily. Because for the first time, there were no hidden agendas. No fabricated authority. Just truth, written down where it belonged. A few of the original residents, folks who had lived there before the development expanded, started stopping by now and then. Not often, just enough to remind me that communities don't come from paperwork or boards or titles. They come from people who respect where they stand. Late one evening, I walked out past the repaired fence line, boots pressing into soil that had already started to heal. The grass was coming back, thin at first but stubborn, the way it always does when you give it the chance. I paused near the ridge, looking out over the land as the sun dropped low, casting long shadows across everything Nancy had tried to take. And for a moment, I thought about how close it had come, how easily something like this could have been lost. Not through force, not through violence, but through paperwork, pressure, and people counting on silence. That's how it happens most of the time. Quietly. But not this time. I reached down, picked up a handful of soil, let it fall slowly through my fingers. Same texture, same weight, same land my grandfather once stood on, untouched by everything that had tried to change it. And as the light faded, settling into that deep, quiet stillness that only places like this can hold, I realized something simple. Power isn't about who speaks the loudest or who claims authority the fastest. It's about who stands firm when it matters. And out here, on land that remembers everything, the truth tends to last longer than anything else ever could. What stands out in this story is not just the legal victory, but the quiet precision of it. Nancy Sterling believed power was something you could manufacture, package, and enforce through paperwork and intimidation. She treated authority like a costume, something worn loudly enough that others would not question it. But real authority does not need volume. It does not rush. It does not force its way through locked gates. Caleb Turner never matched her aggression. He did something far more effective. He remained still, observant, and grounded in truth. And that is what ultimately exposed everything. There is a deeper lesson here about ownership, not just of land, but of boundaries, legal, personal, and moral. A home is not protected by fences alone. It is protected by the clarity of what is rightfully yours and the willingness to stand firm, even when pressure builds. Nancy tried to turn a community into a system of control. Caleb quietly reminded everyone that a real community is built on respect, not coercion. Now, I am curious. What would you have done if someone tried to walk onto your land and claim authority they never truly had? I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.